Hey everybody, Riot Mort here, and it is time for the Monday morning meta report for patch 16.2, week 1. Yes, we're actually out of 16.1, and we get to do a morning meta report for a different patch, so hopefully a bunch of new information here. As always, these are the disclaimers. These reports are based on early experiences, some are internal data, but things can change before official patch notes are determined. Anything included in this report doesn't mean we'll be acting on it necessarily, and data only tells us what is, not what can be. Meta shifts and new discoveries can happen, and we're seeing a little bit of that actually at the Cup this weekend. So just calling that out. I'm recording this Sunday morning. I haven't seen the finals of the Cup yet or anything, so just calling that out. All right, on the champs and trade side, the meta definitely shifted quite a bit, which was expected after a big patch after the long break. The good news is there are a lot of ways to play and get top 4, but definitely will call out two big things I think have ended up over the mark. Bilgewater in particular ended up stronger than even last patch when played ideally. Now, I do say when played ideally, a lot of people aren't really playing it ideally. It's a very deep, complicated trait. But it definitely is one of those things that once it gets going, it can snowball really hard, and definitely ended up a bit stronger. I think things like the MF buff plus bug fix made her quite a bit better. I think Fizz obviously being one of the more frustrating things, and then just really the generic power of the trait. It also didn't help that one of the intended nerfs we did, which was the 2-cost price increase, didn't go through. Not that that would have shifted things dramatically, but it would have been a nice little bump. And then the other one was Ziggs. Ziggs went from a unit that basically nobody was playing to now he's on pretty much all the top capped boards. He's a very powerful unit, works really well with Rise as well. The combination of him and Rise together can often do just so much AoE damage. I think the auto attacks in particular ended up overbuffed as opposed to like his spell. If you look at like some of his item deltas, for example, he ends up really liking things like Ginsu's and Quicksilver as opposed to Shojin and Adaptive Helm and stuff like that. So those are the two things I think definitely ended up a little too strong. If you're trying to get first place, those two comps in particular do very well. That being said, one of the positives here was a lot of the big swings had their intended effect without overswinging. Demacia is still very, very playable, and I think right below those top two comps, we're seeing a lot of Demacia do very well, whether that be some Sona reroll or even just some like late game AP Demacia stuff that can do really well. Void still works perfectly fine. Requires some augments to get to the Baron, obviously, but Baron is still a very high cap that does well. Ishtal can do really good. I think one of the surprising ones for a lot of people is that Yunara and the Ionia are still very, very playable. We actually saw in the cup, if you look at like some of the stats that like Clement put together, Ionia Flex actually did incredibly well at the tournament. So playing Ionia from the right spots definitely still makes sense. From a lot of the changes we made, Zaun actually has some pretty playable versions. Echo Reroll is a pretty good comp right now. Maybe not S tier, but definitely very good. Jinx actually works really, really well in the early and mid game. You can definitely win streak off of a Jinx if you have the right items. You do need bows for Jinx, but she can throw. Singed is definitely out there now, causing a lot of trouble. Singed can do a lot of work in comps. We're seeing Singed get played in a lot of things without necessarily buffing his damage, so that was good. Now, is Jinx reroll playable? No. Is 7 Zaun really playable? Not really. So that's good, Rotho, right? We did these giant buffs to like Jinx, and it didn't put her out of line, so that was a big, awesome thing. I'll also say that Noxus and Shadow Isles are also two comps that, like, again, from the right spot can be played. If you looked at the patch notes and all the Noxus stuff that we would have, added up, it was like, wow, these are big buffs. I think a lot of people thought that Noxus was going to be pretty out of line, but actually, Noxus seems totally fine. Part of that is we still need to fix a Darius issue, but even separate from that, like, it's not out of line. Shadow Isles is also pretty close. I think Callista is actually doing quite well. Again, she doesn't quite stack up to like a Bilgewater or a Ziggs, but she's really high up there. So especially if you get like a Vanquish or Thresh, that can also be pretty insane. Yordle reroll also works pretty well. Again, this caps around Fizz and Ziggs, so part of that is there. But Yordle reroll is actually playable even in some of the higher elos. I will say the Veigar nerf was a good hit. Glad we did that. If we hadn't nerfed Veigar, he would have been insane. The bug fix really did help him quite a bit. For a couple misses here, Aurelion Sol still in rough shape. We have a rework coming for him in 16.3, but this champ got a very large buff and it barely moved the needle, showing you how hard he can be to play. Piltover is too narrow now. It is still technically playable. You can definitely we see T-Hex on boards that can actually do some work, but it's not as easy as just open forwarding with a single Caitlyn into or reroll Caitlyn into. You're going to make it work because it's just not that busted anymore. We do want to make it more accessible than it is now, but definitely a little strong. And then Tryndamere, for example, right now is very tied to artifacts. If you can get some artifacts, he is playable, but without them, not really. I've talked about it before that like Ashe probably should have got some compensation buffs and things like that. So still some work to do. Overall, I'll say on a personal note, I'm at like 440 LP right now. I'm climbing with a lot of different things, but definitely the top end I think is the thing that feels bad when you get to that like stage 5, stage 6 part, and it's like you do see a lot of zigs and rise. That being said, I think a lot of people are playing it from spots they shouldn't, but it is definitely like the top, and Bilgewater being the other one, and the fact that Bilgewater is sort of this S tier, but it sort of requires you to like high roll an early Nautilus or an early Gangplank or a Twisted Fate, you know, not necessarily the most competitive state. So that's kind of what we're seeing. All right, Portable Forge. It is currently below 4.4 at all stages. When I say below, I mean worse. But I will say it is starting to get weaker than we'd like to see it. It's an okay augment at 2.1, but it's starting to fall into that like 4.6, 4.7 range in the 3.2 and 4.2 spaces, which isn't great, which does mean there might be to be some buffs for some artifacts. That being said, if you look at the artifact augments in general, I will say Sweet Treats actually looks pretty strong, showing that the health it provides actually carrying a lot of the weight there than just one artifact. So Sweet Treats, also Sweet Treats can be tied to Bilgewater. I bet if you could, break out the stats and look at Sweet Treats without Bilgewater and with Bilgewater, there might be a pretty big difference there. Latent Forge looks pretty balanced, so we'll have to keep that in mind. But I will say Living Forge and Forged in Strength right now both look pretty weak. In fact, I'll say very weak. And so, like I said, there might be some work to do on some of the artifacts. It might be minor, right? It won't be as big a swing as like the Emblem swing we just took last patch, but we do need to probably buff up some of these artifacts and get them to a point where these augments are more standard. Because again, these are like some of the most popular augments, so want to get those playable. All right, on the overperforming augment side, at high elo, we're actually in a really good spot right now. Again, if our guide here is anything over 4.2, we're looking pretty good for high elo. Golden Egg, which again, that's kind of our marker here. If Golden Egg's at the top, that's a good thing. Jarvan and Shyvana duo looking a little strong, showing kind of the power of Demacia right now. Hustler, really strong, has been, definitely comes and goes. Slice of Life has been another one that's always on this list. Deadlier Caps. This is one that I think is kind of showing the power of like a Veigar, for example. I think a lot of people, when they see this augment, they hard force Veigar, and it works really quite well. So that actually might be a sign that like Veigar and or Fizz are actually even still too strong. And then Malicious Monetization, that's another one that has been pretty strong all set. But other than that, actually, everything's looking pretty good. At lower elo, this is a little less true. Lower elo really likes their verticals here. You can see the augments that are overperforming. Silco's Revenge, though I will say Silco's Revenge is another, I've talked about this before, it's a weird augment where it overperforms in the early game and actually has a really low win rate. So it's a very good top 4 augment, but actually not like a first place augment, which is kind of indicative of its design as well as Zaun. So Jarvan Shyvana duo, Demacia Forever, early learning Sona, very, very good right now. Ruin King, that's another vertical. Bringer of Ruin, another vertical. Malicious Monetization. Noxian Invasion, that's another one that's kind of surprising and showing that like Noxus with augments very playable at low elo. Going Long, this one's like barely below our mark in high elo, so Going Long is another one that's really good. Not, Golden Egg, Expected Unexpectedness. This one actually surprised me a little bit, but I will say it means we're getting pretty close. Is the Zahin augment is actually really, really good in low elo, and it's not bad in high elo by any means. It's just a little harder to play there. Slice of Life, Awakened Soul, Thorn-Plated Armor, and Deadlier Caps. So this is our list in the lower elos. But again, the fact that high elo is getting pretty close, that's good. All right, now the next one's the underperforming augments, and up until now, it's been, hey, these are going to be emblem. Well, we did that big emblem swing, and this is what we're seeing now. Not a lot of emblem ones, but still a couple. Still a couple, actually. So for high elo, we have Wild Growth, which just isn't really working out. The number of 3 stars, like right now, even when you play Yordle, it's definitely a lot of get to 8, play around the Vagar, the Fizz, the Ziggs, things like that. So Wild Growth kind of tells you don't do that, and it's not really working out well. Aura farming, this one's pretty disappointing to see at this low. The fact that aura farming isn't really good. When last set it was like OP. So I think aura farming could really use some love. Double Trouble, Hard Commit, this is an Emblem one, so Hard Commit not really still doing well despite all the Emblem buffs. Hard Commit might need some pretty big work here. Golemify and Dumbify makes sense. Preparation, Living Forge, like we talked about, this one's not great here. Ambessa Kindred Duo, that one needs some work. Chaos Magic, this is the Arcanist one. Ishtal Expeditionist, which I always call out. Ishtal Expeditionist is right where we want it. We do not think this needs buffs. This is where it's supposed to be. Hefty Rolls being the end of the underperforming at high elo. Low elo, similar stuff here. I will call out World Runes is underperforming at low elo, which still blows my mind. This augment is actually busted. It just shows that, again, it is the trait tracker of this set. I will keep calling it that. It is an augment that is hard to play, but when played correctly is insane. Dumbify, Hard Commit, Recombobulator, Double Trouble, Cooking Pot. This is another disappointing one. I'm a little sad Cooking Pot doesn't really pan out, but I will say when you make the Cooking Pot things work, the problem is in the end game you have to run into Zillion, so you can never really have that like 20,000 health fantasy. Aura Farming, Win Out, kind of surprising. Restart Mission, it's always funny that this one's a low performer, and Treasure Hunt. All right, now one other thing to talk about with augments is I did mention the emblem ones, right? The emblem augments used to all be in the bottom here. So where did they land? Let's actually talk about where they landed. From what we can tell, and this one surprised me, but and again, I'm using high elo here, so these are the numbers from high elo. Hard Commit, Flexible, Tactician's Kitchen, We Stick Together, and Cooking Pot are all still weak. And when I say weak, I'm talking in that 4.7 to 4.8 range. They're not really doing well, which is funny because I do see a lot of high elo players over-indexing on Flexible. So could just be some bias, could be some chasing, but Flexible definitely the one that could have stood out to me in this bucket. The rest kind of makes sense, but these augments all still kind of doing weak. In the 4.7 to 4.5 range, we have Branching Out and Branching Out Plus, generally pretty standard augments. Earth being another one, the one that gives you the spatula. That being said, I do think there's some work to do with which ones of these can appear on the Rise portal. I think Earth on the Rise portal and Earth not on the Rise portal are two very different situations. In the 4.5 to 4.35 range, we have Legion of Threes, Spreading Roots and Spreading Roots Plus, World Runes, and Trait Tree. Now, I have World Runes red here because I want to call out that this, to me, shows that World Runes is too strong. And World Runes in particular, like I said, needs to be in like Trait Tracker land. Even at high elo, I would expect this at balance to be like a 4.7 or 4.8. One of those things that when you pull off has a high win rate, much like Trait Tracker. So to me, this is a sign that World Runes is just OP. This is too high for that kind of augment. And then above 4.35, we have Trait Tree Plus. This is one that I think if you wanted to like say, hey, the emblem thing was a miss, I think this is the one augment that's like, well, besides World Runes. This augment also ended up being a little too strong. And then Earth's Gambit is the other one that's above 4.35 as well. So overall, what I'll say is, to me, the emblem rework, I would say landed like 90 to 95% there, right? There's 2 augments here that I definitely think should have been nerfed. I think you can look at the emblems as a whole and maybe pick out like 2 or 3, like is it Demacia Emblem or Juggernaut Emblem or Quickstriker Emblem that are like a little too strong, possibly, but not to any insane degrees. So overall, I'm actually pretty happy with how the emblem rework worked out. People are actually taking spats and pans off carousels. That's a good thing. It did raise the pain around the Rise portal, I will call out. That'd be the one negative side effect as well. But overall, kind of wanted to show where this has landed so far. And then finally, known bugs. Again, this isn't everything. This is just some of them. Yordle can mess with your shop UI. Void Gauntlet, we've talked about this one before. Warpath not interacting with ghosts. This one is new. The TX one, sorry, I meant to delete this line. This one actually should be fixed. I think we did get that one fixed, so apologies. Ishtal Quest sometimes display the wrong number, but it's visual only. Lune's tooltip is incorrect on the number of targets. Darius, this is a new one added here. Darius sometimes monologues himself for longer than intended. This is happening more often than we thought. So we're going to try to hopefully get a fix for that if we can. And then one of the golden eggs cash outs is missing an artifact. It used to be Anima Visage, and so that is no longer there. So yeah. Okay. That is it for the Monday morning meta report. The team's working on the patch today, basically. It's Monday. So you'll see a lot more changes. Some of them are already on PBE. You can see some of them. There will be some more as well, but patch will start getting worked on, and you'll have a patch rundown by the end of the week, or Sunday, Monday kind of thing. So, all right, that's gonna do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.